The UN has sounded a dire warning that climate change is unfolding more quickly than feared and humanity is almost entirely to blame. It says ongoing emissions could also see a key temperature limit broken in just over a decade. Wildfires are continuing to burn across Greece. On one island, Evia, villagers have been evacuated and ferries are taking people to safety. The president of Belarus has told the BBC that Britain can choke on the economic sanctions it's imposed on his country in response to human rights abuses. He was speaking at a press conference 1 year since the disputed presidential election. And the Taliban have seized 6 provincial capitals in Afghanistan, including Kunduz. They dismissed international calls for a ceasefire.
Hundreds of families in Afghanistan are seeking safety in Kabul after fleeing provinces like Takhar and Kunduz as Taliban militants capture more territory. A big report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns the warming of the atmosphere is speeding up and represents a code red for humanity. In Ethiopia, demonstrators gather in Addis Ababa to protest fighters in the country's Tigray area. And Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga thanked the Japanese people for holding a safe Olympic Games while facing the coronavirus crisis.
Happy Monday to all of you. Great to see Amy back. We begin here today with the devastating fires in the West. Overnight, tens of thousands of people forced to evacuate and firefighters surrounded by flames as they wrestle with the Dixie Fire, now the second largest wildfire in California history, threatening 14,000 more structures after destroying the entire town of Greenville. And the new alarm bells in a major climate change report from the United Nations. The UN saying unequivocally humans are causing climate change, and some of our most extreme weather events have a link to that change, calling it code red for humanity. Air quality taking a hit across the country from those raging wildfires, with record-breaking heat adding to the dangers.
Overseas now to the wildfire catastrophe in Greece. Dozens of new fires have broken out, and there are desperate scenes of evacuations as 21 countries send help. And this is coming as a new warning on climate change comes out from the UN. Maggie Rulli is on the scene in Greece. Good morning, Maggie.
Hey, George, good morning. Yeah, we've been getting just rained on with ash all morning long. And look at this behind me. You can see ferries, a Coast Guard ship, just regular fishing and motorboats, all of them standing by, ready to go just in case people need to evacuate off this island. This morning, after a week of what's being called apocalyptic fires raging across Greece, fire risk remains extremely high. Across Evia, a tourist hotspot about 2 hours north of Athens, thousands of people rushed to evacuate in the middle of the night by ferries, private boats, any way they could.
My heart cries, I leave my family behind, but if I'm there, they're going to worry about me. So it's better for me to take care of our family.
The fire likely fueled by bone-dry conditions, just days after the country's worst heat wave in 3 decades. Officials blaming human-driven climate change as temperatures reach 113 degrees. You can hear the crackle of these flames. The fires are just ripping through the underbrush here. Look at that. We see it climbing up that tree. It is going all the way up the hillside. We have seen dozens of these hotspots popping up along the road. This is what firefighters are struggling to keep up with. Minutes later, firefighters arrive, fighting back the flames side by side with volunteers. Those firefighters told us they need more help, and at least 20 countries have been stepping in. But guys, these conditions, they are just relentless. And tomorrow we're expecting another day nearing 100 degrees. It is why everyone here is on high alert. This port is ready to go. All these boats behind me ready to accept passengers, tourists, and residents if they need to escape off this island, even in the middle of the night. Guys?
Desperate situation there. Thank you, Maggie.
Well, Diane, they didn't start very well. Not on the best note, anyway. Most Japanese really didn't want them to go ahead. It's hard to believe, but 2 weeks ago, we were at the opening ceremony, and there were protests on the street. People were worried about COVID. But I think it's been a quiet success, really. The Japanese have seen their own athletes do really well on the medals table. And COVID has, by and large, been kept under control inside the Olympic bubble. Just 436 cases, 29 of those athletes. I think we're going to have to wait and see what the wider impact is, of course, over and above just the Olympics, the impact on Tokyo in a larger sense, because cases are still going up, and we have the Paralympics to come. But COVID aside, for me, there were other big themes here at these Olympics, which I really kind of did sort of see front and centre. One of them about money in sport, particularly because people couldn't go along to these Olympics. The Japanese were largely shut out. The idea of who decides how elite sport is put on. The fight, if you like, about whether or not the IOC had pushed Japan into putting these games on when they didn't want to in the first place. The idea that, you know, Lindsay in Ohio, if she decides to share something on Twitter and it gets removed immediately because the rights holder has an issue with it. These sorts of things, I think, were big themes here. Doping here. I mean, a lot of athletes were angry that the Russians were able to compete. They competed as the Russian Olympic Committee, but they still kind of wore their tracksuits with their national colours on it. The head of the US anti-doping agency called that a farce, so that will be something that Paris will have to think about in 2024. And the weather, it was so hot here, Diane. So a Summer Olympics in our warming climate. We've just heard about wildfires all around the world. Here in Tokyo, it felt like we were experiencing wildfires. I mean, I went down to the skate park, incredible new sport, watching teenagers compete and win medals, but it was hotter than the sun. So a lot of huge themes for these Olympics over and above COVID, but by and large, I think a success.
Yeah, a lot of conversations sparked from these games, that's for sure. So, James, let's do this one last time. Where does the final medal count stand?
So, the US has 39 gold medals. That's from 113.
People across Japan have commemorated a catastrophic event during World War II. 76 years ago, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the southwestern city of Nagasaki just 3 days after the world's first atomic attack leveled Hiroshima. Nagasaki fell silent Monday at 11:02 a.m., the exact time the bomb exploded. It devastated the city, killing more than 70,000 people by the end of 1945. Many survivors suffer from cancer and other diseases related to their exposure to radiation. The memorial ceremony was drastically scaled down for a second consecutive year due to anti-coronavirus measures. The attendees watched as the names of the victims were symbolically placed on the memorial. The register now contains 189,163 names. It includes the names of 3,202 people that have been added since last year. Oka Nobuko spoke about her experience on behalf of the hibakusha, or survivors of the atomic bombing. She was a 16-year-old student nurse at the time. Although she was injured herself, she was mobilized to take care of others who were badly wounded and dying.
私たち被爆者は命あげに語り継げ核兵で廃絶と平和を訴え続けていくことを誓います。
In his peace declaration, the mayor of Nagasaki referred to a UN treaty that bans nuclear weapons. The treaty came into force in January, but nuclear powers, as well as Japan and other countries protected by the U.S. nuclear umbrella, have not signed it.
As the country that is most aware of the tragic consequences of nuclear weapons, Japan should join the first meeting of state parties to the UN treaty as an observer in order to look into ways to develop the treaty. And I demand that Japan sign the treaty and ratify it as soon as possible.
Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide noted there are disparities between where nations stand on nuclear disarmament.
Through mutual engagement and dialogue, countries must dispel the sense of distrust and make efforts to build a common foundation.
Suga said Japan aims to achieve meaningful results at an upcoming review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The average age of the survivors is now over 83. As they grow older, they're struggling to pass on their experiences, especially as the pandemic deprives them of the chance to speak to people face-to-face and at public events. People in Nagasaki shared their hopes for peace, with many offering prayers for the victims and remembering what happened in 1945. About 200 people attended a Catholic mass held at a cathedral 500 meters from Ground Zero. 8,500 followers died from the blast in the area. This 80-year-old survivor was 4 years old.
All I remember was a flash of light, so strong that I couldn't open my eyes. I hope for a world that is peaceful and that is free of nuclear weapons.
More than 70 high school students from across the nation came together at Ground Zero.
As the survivors age, young people are becoming less interested in the atomic bombings. We, as high school students, pledge to pass the baton of peace on to the next generation.
They formed a human chain to create a message for a world without nuclear arms. To reduce the coronavirus risk, they were linked by ribbons instead of holding hands. Children at Shiroyama Elementary School gathered in the gymnasium. The blast claimed the lives of more than 1,400 students and teachers from the school. About 100 students sang a song memorializing the tragedy and calling for peace. It's been sung every year for decades. Residents of Nagasaki reflected on the catastrophe throughout Monday, sending the message the atomic bombing that devastated their city should forever be the world's last. Japan's prime minister has thanked the country's people for helping to host the Tokyo Olympics one day after the games came to a close.
The Games were held under unprecedented restrictions after a one-year delay due to the coronavirus pandemic, but Japan fulfilled its duty as the host nation. The result was made possible thanks to the public's understanding and cooperating. I really appreciate that.
Suga also praised the athletes for helping to achieve a wonderful Olympics. He said some people from abroad complained the anti-virus measures were too strict, but others said only Japan can implement such rigorous measures. And foreign media outlets have given their assessments of the Olympics. The BBC said the Games had an array of inspiring performances and innovative new sports that captured the imagination. But it also said whether it was right the Olympics happened at all will always be a matter for debate. Reuters reported, with strict pandemic countermeasures and as COVID-19 variants have surged back around the world, the Olympics fell short of the triumph and financial windfall Japan had wanted. And now to the coronavirus situation here in Japan. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government says it confirmed 2,884 new cases on Monday. That's a record high for a Monday, up nearly 700 from a week ago. The number of seriously ill patients is up 6 from Sunday to 157. Kanagawa Prefecture, which borders the capital, registered a record daily high of 2,166 cases. And the nationwide tally of new infections topped 12,000. Health officials are asking people to refrain from moving beyond prefectural borders. Climate change experts with the United Nations says it's now indisputable human activity is causing climate change and affecting every region of the planet. A new report warns extreme weather events are likely to become more frequent unless the world takes fast action.
It explains that strong, rapid, sustained reductions in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions would be required to limit global warming.
The report is the first by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 8 years. It warns temperatures could cross a critical mark in less than 20 years. Back in 2015, world leaders agreed to try to keep global warming to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The new report says the average increase was already 1.1 degrees over the last decade. And there's a more than 50% chance it crosses that 1.5 degree mark by 2040, even if global greenhouse emissions are on pace to reach net zero by around 2050. The report says extreme heat waves are now expected about 5 times more frequently than pre-1900. If global warming hits that 1.5 degree mark, they're likely to hit more than 8.5 times more often.